Halloween is supposed to be harmless, costumes, candy, and fake scares. But every year, some stories go untold. A chase through a haunted maze, a stranger at the window, footsteps in an empty house. All reminders that on Halloween night, not every mask comes off, and not every scream is pretend.
The Clowns on the Roof. Halloween of 2019 was the most terrifying night of Sean's life. Since Australia didn't celebrate Halloween enthusiastically, they rarely got more than 5 or 6 trick-or-treaters. Sean, however, was a huge fan. To the dismay of his parents, who preferred not to acknowledge the holiday, Sean was left in charge of putting up decorations and handing out candy. This year, Halloween fell on a school night, and a storm began just after 6 o'clock, meaning his efforts preparing the decorations had gone to waste. Ignoring his better judgment, Sean waited for trick-or-treaters in the living room, watching The Conjuring to pass the time. About an hour and a half later, he got a message from his friend M on the group chat, asking if anyone wanted to mess around and go trick-or-treating. At first, Sean was confused. They hadn't gone trick-or-treating in over 5 years, but he decided it would make the night more enjoyable as nobody was knocking anyway. His other friends, S, C, and H, all agreed and asked M where they should meet up. M quickly replied he couldn't make it, which was strange since he was the one who offered, but he suggested a house with lots of candy. Sean, S, C, and H all arrived at the suggested house within half an hour. A large table with a pumpkin bowl filled with lollipops stood on the front porch. After checking the windows to make sure they weren't being watched, they emptied the bowl between them, only leaving a few to avoid suspicion. As they turned around to leave, they were greeted by 2 men dressed as clowns approaching them up the driveway. They had huge painted smiles and tilted heads. Sean could tell they were all creeped out. One of his friends screamed as the clowns started bolting toward them, one squeaking its rubber nose as they chased. After running for what felt like an eternity, they finally lost them.
They decided to go to M's house so they could discuss what just happened in a safe area. However, when M answered the door, he burst into laughter. After sitting down on M's couch, they all soon realized M had lost his phone earlier that day. A stranger had used M's phone to suggest the idea, presumably setting a trap for the clowns. After another half hour, Sean cautiously made it home by 9:30, finished his movie, and went to collect the candy bowl he had set up. Sean was shocked to see the bowl was completely empty. His stomach turned, however, when he saw a clown nose now laying inside of it. He told his parents everything that happened and showed them the clown nose that had been left. They assured him it was just some Halloween prank. He woke up around 1 a.m. to noises coming from his bedroom window, like rocks hitting the glass. Although he was scared half to death, his curiosity got the better of him, and he eventually opened the blinds. Below, his Halloween decorations were destroyed and littered the ground. Sean stared motionless in complete shock until a lollipop was thrown at the window, breaking his trance. He looked up and saw them, the 2 clowns, perched upon the neighbor's roof, looking down at him. He screamed and ran toward his parents' room. The police were called and the clowns were not found. The officers informed them they would check out the house Sean and his friends had trick-or-treated at, and they left in about half an hour. The following morning, they were told the house was abandoned and M's phone was discovered inside. That day at school, Sean learned M, S, C, and H all had creepy experiences during the night as well. All Sean knew was that Halloween was only a few weeks away, and he was completely terrified they would return.
The Mask on the Stairs. It was a school night Halloween. Dana's mom and dad took her 2 twin brothers out trick-or-treating. Dana didn't have plans, so her parents kind of forced her to answer the door and hand out candies while they were gone. Since they lived on a dead-end cul-de-sac, they got next to no trick-or-treaters, so every time the doorbell rang, Dana jumped. She was in the living room watching TV, with a bucket of candies next to her on a small table. Butterfingers, the one and only candy her mom always got on Halloween for some reason. The doorbell rang. Dana took the orange bucket, brought it to the door, and opened it. There was someone in a scream mask and robe holding out a pillow sack. It didn't look like he had gotten much candy for the night. Given that the night was almost over and he was alone, which felt sad, Dana gave him a generous amount of candy. He walked away without saying thanks, which made Dana feel a little bad, but it was nothing she dwelled on. She stopped thinking about it as soon as she sat back down on a couch. The movie she was watching ended, so she started surfing the channels. During one of the brief moments of silence as the TV flipped, she heard a thud and a bump come from downstairs near the back door. To better hear what it was, she muted the TV and went to the stairway. The back door was wide open. Her heart started racing and she felt sick. She realized she had forgotten to lock it when she was back there. The big question was whether what she heard was the door opening or closing, and if someone was in the house. Naturally, she called down the stairway for her mom and dad, and then her twins' names. The silence from the dark den was creepy as hell. She was afraid to go down there. Unfortunately, there was no door to separate the main floor from the den stairway, so sitting in the living room suddenly didn't seem very comfortable. She kept the TV on, muted. She just felt safer with the extra light it provided. It took a while, but it finally hit her to call her parents and ask them to come home. Her mom said they'd be home within half an hour. Dana told her mom she was scared someone was downstairs because she heard something. Her mom assured her there was nothing and it was just her imagination. Dana hung up the phone and immediately heard the sound of wood foundation cracking under one of the carpeted steps to the den. Dana froze on the couch. Literally, she couldn't move a muscle, not even a finger. Then there was another crack. As silently as she could, she sat up from the couch into a half-crouched position, tiptoeing to the front door. But as she passed the couch that blocked the view of the den stairway, she saw something on the stairs. It was a scream mask leering up from the stairs at her, but in a way that showed the person was obviously trying not to be caught. The angle and the dark lighting made the sight terrifyingly disturbing. When he saw Dana, he went the other way, back into the darkness of the den. Dana locked herself in her room upstairs and called her mom again to tell her what happened. They cut their trip short and came home. Only when her parents got home did Dana feel safe to leave her room. Her dad and she checked the whole den, every closet, every room. Luckily, there was no one. The moral of the story simply comes down to keeping your doors locked, because apparently this guy just helped himself through the back door.
The Skeleton Man's Agenda. It was Halloween weekend. Halloween was falling on a Saturday that year. Liam was throwing a house party at his parents' house. The only rule his parents gave him was that it had to be a closed invite, no strangers. His parents were gone for the weekend, which allowed him to host, though the second rule was the place needed to be cleaner than before. He invited around 50 people and 40 showed up. The party started around 6, just as it was getting dark. The party was partially in the backyard and partially on the first floor. His parents left him money for sodas and food in the kitchen. Liam had told them it would be non-alcoholic, but he suspected they knew that was a lie. His friend, who was a few years older, brought his DJ equipment, and the party was in full swing by dark. Everyone seemed to listen. Liam recognized almost everyone, and they all greeted him after entering. Liam didn't drink too much because he wanted to be somewhat responsible, but everyone else was getting drunker as the night went on. Eventually, one of his friends came out after getting food and asked who the guy in the skeleton bodysuit inside the house was. Liam didn't recall seeing anyone in that costume, so he went inside, where a few people were hanging out in the kitchen. He asked if they saw the skeleton bodysuit, and someone replied, "Yeah, he seemed like he was snooping around the house." Liam grew concerned. He asked if anyone invited him or knew who it was, but no one did. He looked around the house and found the figure walking down the stairs. Liam asked, "Who are you?" The figure said, "Mike, I was using the bathroom upstairs." It was a really deep voice, sounding older. The man's frame was larger, not muscular, just a stockier build. Liam asked, "Who invited you?" He replied, "Tom." Liam didn't know a single Tom, so he pressed, "Who is Tom?" Then he just asked the figure to take his mask off. The man didn't listen or even respond. The man walked past him toward the front door, then left. Liam ran upstairs to check if any rooms had been gone through. All the doors except the bathroom door were closed, and after a quick look, it seemed nothing was stolen. So he locked the front door, then told a bunch of his friends about the encounter. He went outside to ask if anyone knew who invited the skeleton guy, and not a single person did. Eventually, he gave it a rest. The party was winding down around midnight. Most people were starting to leave, but a few close friends stayed behind to help clean up. The party was a success. When everyone was gone, Liam started getting ready for bed. His friend, Vinny, stayed over on the couch downstairs. After brushing his teeth and changing into pajamas, Liam decided to go hang out with Vinny in the living room. They had some drinks and watched funny YouTube videos on TV. His little sister, who was 14, was asleep by now. She didn't hang with the party because she was too young. They were being quiet so as not to wake her, but when Vinny and Liam both heard noises from upstairs, it sounded like the noise had woken her. Liam expected the footsteps to move to the bathroom. He grew confused when he never heard his sister's door open. He decided to go upstairs to check on her. He knocked on her door, but she didn't answer. He opened it a crack and saw that she was sleeping. So what were those noises he was hearing? He went to his parents' room and realized the door wasn't clicked shut. He was able to just push it open without turning the doorknob, which was odd because he'd made sure the door was closed before the party. Liam looked inside the room without turning on the lights. Then as he backed out, he looked through the crack of the door and on the other side saw the man in the skeleton bodysuit. He made no mistake. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He was impressed with himself for not running or screaming. He pretended he didn't see the man and quietly pulled the door closed. Then he went downstairs and told Vinny, "The guy from before is in the house." He had Vinny call 911 to report the intruder, while Liam tiptoed back upstairs to his sister's room. He shook her awake, explained what was going on, and made sure she would be quiet while following him downstairs. She did a good job not freaking out. When they were downstairs, they met Vinny in the kitchen by the back door, where they went outside to the backyard. They cut through the side to the front and rang their neighbor's bell at least 3 times. The neighbor let them wait inside, but at some point before the police got there, the skeleton man escaped through Liam's parents' bedroom window. He knew because the window was now open. Their closet door was also open, where his dad kept his safe. It was obvious it was someone who knew about the safe and was trying to break into it or remove it entirely. It was obvious how the man broke in. He simply just walked back into the party. It could have been any number of people. They never found out who it was, but it was someone who knew Liam was having a party, someone older, and someone who knew about his parents' safe. His sister ended up telling their parents about it, and obviously that was the last party Liam was ever allowed to throw at their house.
The visitor in the attic. It was Halloween weekend, falling on a Saturday this year. Jules' mom always took decorations and giving out candy very seriously. It was almost like she had to compete with the neighbors to have the most sought-after house to trick-or-treat at. They lived on a corner in a suburban neighborhood, so when they decorated, they also covered the side yard. Since Halloween was a Saturday, kids started trick-or-treating earlier. However, it was a cloudy, cold day with a chance of rain. Jules' mom apparently couldn't understand this might be why there weren't many trick-or-treaters out. Instead, after a few trick-or-treaters seemed to skip their house, she assumed it was because there weren't enough decorations to attract them. She told Jules to go get whatever containers were left in the attic. Jules insisted this wasn't necessary, but his mom forced him, so he went up to the attic, which was directly above his bedroom. The attic door was in the hallway upstairs. He pulled down the door and climbed the ladder. They had the holiday containers sorted a specific way, so he went over to the Halloween section. There were only a couple left. He opened one to see what was inside and decided, good enough. He started dragging the container toward the door, then carefully slid it down the ladder. As he was about to climb down, he thought he heard something on the opposite side of the attic, like a piece of wood cracking under pressure. He looked over to the wall of containers in the far corner. It was just an attic, though. The sound of wood snapping or cracking really wasn't that weird. He climbed down and brought the decorations downstairs. From there, his mom and he put out some more decorations in the front yard. It was really windy and felt like rain any second. There really weren't many trick-or-treaters at all.
His mom was disappointed because she goes all out with the candy, too. She was always one of those people who makes a bunch of homemade goodie bags with different candies inside. Jules could see how upset she was that she wasn't going to give most of them away. The day progressed, and Jules was in his room playing video games on his laptop, while his mom was downstairs handing out candy to the few trick-or-treaters who came. And then it started to rain, which pretty much put a damper on the rest of the day's trick-or-treating. Jules used to be a big gamer in his teens, so instead of going out with friends on a Saturday night, he would often just stay in playing video games. This night was no exception. He stayed up really late into the night, long after his parents had gone to sleep. It was still raining outside. Then he heard something above him again. This time, it sounded distinctly like footsteps. He wondered if his mom was in the attic putting stuff away, but it was too late. He sat and listened for a while. The sound stopped. He paused his game and went out into the hallway after a couple of minutes and saw the attic door was open. Now he heard noises downstairs in the kitchen. He heard the sound of things being moved around in the fridge. His heart was racing now. He tiptoed down the hall to his parents' room, quietly opened the door, and saw both his parents fast asleep in bed. His stomach twisted. He felt sick. He quietly closed the door and went up to his dad to shake him awake. His dad woke up easily. Jules whispered, "There's someone in the house." His dad immediately, "Now in the fridge. I think they're hiding in the attic." Jules's dad was not a large or confrontational man. He kept a police baton under his bed for an emergency, but Jules didn't think he ever expected to use it. His dad told him to stay quiet. He went to quietly look out into the hall. When he came back inside, he whispered that he saw someone down the hall climbing into the attic. He shut the bedroom door, locked it, and called 911. By now his mom was awake too, but they all stayed as quiet as possible. It was now a waiting game until the police showed up. His dad went downstairs to open the front door. The attic door was now shut. The police went inside, and they found a homeless-looking man hiding in the corner behind the wall of containers. The sounds Jules was hearing were in fact from a person the whole time. The man, while dirty and somewhat scary-looking, was straightforward and honest. He simply walked in when he saw the front door was open the day before, and he had no place to sleep. He brought one of their blankets up there, and there was a jar of peanut butter he was eating. The whole thing was still very disturbing. Jules wondered how things would have played out if he or his father had confronted the man instead of the police. His parents didn't press any charges.
The Clown and the Cave. This happened in 2016 when Ethan was 15. This would be his last year trick-or-treating, so he wanted to make it a big occasion. His mom was pretty laid back, so it turned into a huge multi-day event. A sleepover with Davis and Zach the day before Halloween, skipping school, trick-or-treating with them, and then a sleepover with his girlfriend, Amber. Their basement had just been renovated into a man cave, so they naturally wanted to stay there for the night. The basement had a long, unlit hallway leading to the man cave. The light switch didn't work. It had a creepy vibe, but for a horror movie night, that was a good thing. His mom made them cookies, and they went down into the cave. It was around 11 p.m. They had just finished the original Scream. The second movie would be Paranormal Activity, which none of them had watched, so Ethan picked it. Ethan remembered pausing the movie, not even 30 seconds in, because the motion-detected light in the backyard turned on. It lit the whole room up, ruining the creepy vibe. He waited for the 30-second timer to run out, then unpaused the movie. Then, after about another 30 seconds, the light went off a second time. Ethan started getting annoyed. Davis asked what kept making it turn on, and Ethan said he had no clue. 30 more seconds passed, the light turned off a third time, and he started the movie again. At this point, Ethan wanted to know what the hell was going on. He asked Davis and Zach to come upstairs with him to see what it was. They agreed and went up to look through the back door. By the time they reached it, the light was off, so it was hard to see. They stood for 5 minutes, but nothing happened. They went back down to the den, turned off the movie, and just sat on their phones and talked. They weren't really invested in it anyway. About 2 hours later, everyone was asleep except for Ethan. He was scrolling on his phone when the familiar glow of the motion light came through the window for the 4th time. He was exhausted and figured it was just another group of kids trying to prank them. But the more he thought about it, the less it made sense. He checked the backyard one last time, and just as he expected, no one was out there. He gave up, went back down to the den, and called it a night. The next night came quickly. Soon, Ethan had a full bag of candy. He felt a kind of sadness. In a way, this was like his childhood ending. However, he figured he should just try and enjoy the night. He still had lingering thoughts about the previous night and wondered whether he should tell Amber. She was scared of everything, and he didn't want to ruin their night over the story. They were at one of their last houses when Amber let out a loud yell in pain. They asked what happened, and she said she had a rock thrown at her. Ethan turned around to find a guy in a clown mask standing about 15 feet behind them. This was amid the clown epidemic. Ethan told him to get lost, but he just stood there. Analyzing him more, Ethan realized the figure looked like a grown man. He only had the mask on. The rest of his costume was just normal clothes. They kept walking, but the man only stood there. At this point, they called it a night and skipped the last few houses out of anxiety. They went back to Ethan's house so his friends could get picked up. Soon, it was just his girlfriend and him, looking at the candy scattered on the floor in the den. Amber asked if they could watch a movie. Ethan decided to turn on Paranormal Activity again later that night to finish it. Ethan remembered the scene perfectly. It was the character Miko walking around to find his girlfriend when suddenly the screen went black and the dimmed lights in the cave turned off. Amber and Ethan looked at each other. He realized the power went out. This immediately made Ethan paranoid. The power had never gone out in the house unless there was a storm. Ethan checked his weather app and it showed normal conditions, not even a little rain. He told Amber to stay in the cave, but she was scared, so she decided to come upstairs with him to see what was going on. The house generator was in the backyard, and that's when Ethan got the terrible feeling in his stomach. The thoughts of the previous night crept back. This time he didn't have Davis and Zach, and Amber wasn't very strong. All the worst thoughts came to mind as he opened the sliding door to the backyard. All he heard was crickets chirping. He figured he was just overthinking. Amber and he passed by the motion light, which didn't kick on now. He was about 5 feet from the generator when he thought he heard a twig snap. Amber and he looked toward the forest on the far side of the yard. The only sounds were crickets, but they felt like they were being watched. Ethan almost felt like he had to throw up. He decided they would rather stay in the house with no lights on than be out there. Ethan didn't want to be outside any longer. Amber started making her way inside, and that's when Ethan saw him. The same guy in a clown mask was standing to the side of his shed. They stared at each other for a while, like the clown was trying to scare them, and then he suddenly jumped forward and started running at them. Ethan ran to the back door and slammed it shut after Amber. They ran down into the cave and got behind the bar in the corner of the room. That's when Ethan realized he never locked the back door and they heard a slam from upstairs. Now everything was silent in the man cave. Amber started texting 911 because she was too scared to talk, explaining there was a man in the house. Minutes felt like hours. It must have been 10 minutes tops, and the sound Ethan had been dreading came, the basement door opening. He heard footsteps come down the stairs and down the hallway. His girlfriend was breathing too loud. He had to cover her mouth. He heard footsteps come toward their direction and stop. Ethan started to think his only option was to fight if he found them. He grabbed a beer bottle from behind the bar and prepared himself mentally to fight. The room stayed silent for a while, but then they heard sirens outside. Ethan realized this was the perfect distraction. In a fraction of a second, he got up, ran at the clown, and swung the bottle at his head, but he tripped and fell after he swung. Ethan looked up to see the man in the clown mask. The mask must have somewhat blocked the swing because the man barely flinched. Ethan realized this was a stupid idea as the man seemed about to go back upstairs after hearing the sirens anyway. The man looked down at him on the floor. Ethan was about to yell at Amber to run as he scrambled to get up. His legs felt numb. He realized his life could potentially end right now, but the police sirens were loud outside. The man stared for another moment before running up the stairs.
Then they heard the back door open and slam again. Ethan ran upstairs to let the police in and told them he went out back. The answer was no. The police somehow never caught the guy to Ethan's knowledge. He can't go down to that man cave alone anymore without feeling anxious, even to this day. So they hung out at Amber's for a while after that. He'll never forget that feeling of looking up and seeing that clown mask staring down at him as he flailed upon the ground.
The Cashier and the Cowboy. Halloween used to be one of Ryan's favorite holidays, but now he only enjoyed it when he had a good party to attend. In 2018, when he was a senior in college, his friend Tracy's sorority was throwing a big party at the sorority house. She said he could bring one friend, since they didn't want too many outsiders, so he invited his best friend, Cody. Ryan and Cody were very last-minute people when it came to costumes. The party was that night, and they didn't have anything. Cody was working late and asked Ryan to pick up a costume for him, promising to Venmo him the money later. Ryan ran to the nearby Spirit Halloween store, which was only 5 minutes from his house. He was just trying to get in and out quickly. He picked a Where's Waldo costume for himself and a Superman costume for Cody, 2 of the cheaper options. Everything was normal until he got to the cashier. He was on the phone with Cody, giving him details about the costume in the party, the sorority, Tracy's invite, the address, and confirming that he would pick Cody up instead of meeting there. The cashier watched Ryan the entire time. He was older, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, with a receding hairline. He wore glasses, had a skinny build, and an awkward, unsettling presence. As he rang up the 2 costumes, the cashier commented, "Sounds like you have a fun party tonight, huh?" Ryan chuckled and said yes. The cashier pressed for more details, asking if it was open invite, and commenting about there being lots of girls. Ryan stressed that it was a closed invite and that he barely got in. The cashier said, "It's all good." He shook Ryan's hand and introduced himself as Mike. Ryan introduced himself as Sean and then left. The exchange was undeniably weird. Later that night, Ryan picked up Cody and they arrived at the party around 10 p.m. It sounded loud inside, and multiple groups of people were entering the house ahead of them. At the door, a girl asked who they knew, and Ryan said Tracy. She let them in. They were in a huge living room area, music blasting, lights dimmed low, Halloween decorations everywhere, and people with red cups crowding the place. They found Tracy and hung around her for a while. They played beer pong and other drinking games. It was a very legit party. But at some point, there was a commotion by the front door. Cody, Tracy, Ryan, and a few others walked over. The girl at the door was calling out for Tracy.
Tracy came forward, and the girl asked, "Who is Sean?" Ryan said, "I am." Then the girl asked who the creepy guy Ryan invited was. Ryan was confused and asked who. She described an older man in a cowboy costume with a fake mustache. He had apparently inappropriately touched one of the girls, trying to get her into a separate room, and she screamed for help. He then took off with something in his pocket, and no one chased after him. Immediately, Ryan thought of the cashier from Spirit Halloween. He told them about the cashier, and everyone got even more creeped out. The party continued, but they were much more cautious about who they let in, and even considered calling the police. The whole thing killed Ryan's vibe, and they didn't stay much longer. In total, they were probably at the party for a couple of hours at most, leaving a little past midnight. Ryan hadn't drunk much. As Ryan started his car, the car parked 2 spots behind them also turned on. As Ryan drove toward Cody's house, the car started to follow. After it made 4 of the same turns, Cody and Ryan were sure it was him. Ryan pulled to the side of the road trying to egg the driver on, but the car just stopped for a few seconds, then floored it past them. They didn't get a good look at who was inside, but Ryan was positive it was the cashier. After dropping Cody off a block from his house as a precaution, Ryan stayed highly aware of his surroundings. Because of this, he noticed a car in the near distance with its lights off, tailing him. It looked like the same car. Ryan got to a main road, once again pulled over, and waited. The car also waited, and then a few seconds later turned on its lights and blazed past him in the far left lane. He was obviously shaken and drove home as fast as he could, making sure he wasn't being followed. He called that Spirit Halloween location the next day and reported the cashier. They thanked him for the information, but he never went back, so he didn't know if the cashier was fired. Looking back, Ryan wondered if he could and should have pressed charges. He had no idea what the man could have possibly wanted, but either way, he was happy the man didn't find out where he lived.
Ouija, a voice, and something tall. It was a stormy Halloween night. Frank was with his 3 friends, John, Mary, and Keenan. Since they didn't have any real plans and were just hanging around, Frank decided to grab the Ouija board from his closet. All his friends were keen to try it. To set the mood, he lit 3 candles and turned off all the lights. The 4 sat at the table with their hands on the planchette. They started by asking, "Is anyone there?" Of course, the planchette started to move, and they all laughed as it went from Y to E to S, spelling yes. John and Frank began asking stupid, goofy questions like, "Will you haunt Mary?" Mary kept begging them to stop, but as the planchette moved to once again spell out yes, they erupted into laughter. Frank realized he hadn't contributed to moving the piece around the board at all. He just assumed John and Keenan were messing around. Then, without anyone asking a question, the planchette started moving, spelling, "I'm inside the house." More nervous laughs until there was a huge, very obvious thump sound from directly upstairs, right over their heads. It most closely resembled a boot stomping on the floor. All of them jumped. Mary started screaming and freaking out. John, Keenan, and Frank didn't know whether to laugh or be freaked out. Frank's parents weren't home. No one was except for him. They didn't have any pets. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. They looked at each other. Frank went to look through the peephole, then opened the door. It was a dad and his young son trick-or-treating under an umbrella. Frank handed the kids some candies, but once he shut the door, it was back to the current reality, figuring out what the hell that sound was. He convinced all 3 of them to come upstairs with him to check. They all got to the upstairs hallway where the only light came from a nightlight plugged into a floor outlet. They were halfway through the hallway, approaching his parents' bedroom, the room directly above the table where they sat, when they heard the noise. That's when they all heard the same thing, the voice of a girl. None of them could make out what was said, but all 4 agreed they heard a girl's voice inside his parents' room, followed by the sound of something being dropped on the floor. Mary and Keenan, completely freaked out, ran silently down the stairs. John and Frank, however, approached the door. Frank opened it quietly and pushed it open slowly. Frank looked into the dark room and saw something tall standing motionless in the far corner. He slammed the door shut and they ran down the stairs. They flicked on the living room lights, then noticed one of the candles by the Ouija board was blown out. Frank called the police. A few minutes later, when an officer arrived, Frank asked him to check his parents' bedroom. Frank led him up the stairs and pointed at the door. The officer knocked, announced "Police," then opened the door quickly and flicked on the light. The officer checked the closet, under the bed, nothing. John and Frank followed him in and confirmed no one was there. While they were at it, they checked every single bedroom and bathroom upstairs. There was not a single possible place anybody could be hiding. After the police officer left, they threw the Ouija board in the neighbor's garbage. They all sat under the awning in the backyard, listening to the storm in silence until Frank's parents returned. After telling the story to his parents, his friends eventually left. His parents seemed to believe them, but what could they really do? Frank didn't sleep well that night and had no plans of ever using a Ouija board again.
The Clowns and the Chase. It was Halloween 2016. Henry and his 3 friends, Jay, Kay, and Lou, were trick-or-treating downtown. That area was always a mob scene on Halloween, simply because the houses were close together, meaning more candy for the distanced walked. 10 o'clock was when things started to die down, and by 10:30, they were the only ones still out. Only 1 in 10 houses opened their doors this late, so they called it quits with the trick-or-treating and decided to just goof off. It was a Saturday night, after all. As they quit trick-or-treating,
A lone person in a clown costume walked really, really slowly out of the black fog in the distance. It was a legitimate horror costume. The makeup was crazy, from the slit-mouth smile to the blood-filled boils. The four boys laughed and screamed in reaction, but ultimately walked away. They went to a nearby park to goof around, making a mess with silly string and shaving cream. They weren't the first, however. Strands of silly string littered the playground, and shaving cream was smeared on the bathroom building walls to spell out obscenities. They were hanging out on the playground when Jay pointed to the dark horizon where two clowns were walking toward them. One was the same clown from earlier. Henry didn't think it was possible, but the second clown was even more disturbing. The first clown now seemed to be wielding some kind of long, spear-like object. They both approached very, very slowly. The funniness of the situation quickly wore off as they crept closer. Then they started to charge. They all ran in different directions. One of the two clowns was chasing Henry. He ran out of the park and down the street. He didn't know the area too well, but he did know how to get back to Lou's house. He ran all the way there. About halfway there, he lost the clown. Henry called Lou and told him he was in his backyard. Lou was out of breath but said he had just lost one of the clowns and was on his way over. Henry said he would call Jay, and Lou said he would call Kay. Luckily, Jay picked up on the first ring. He wasn't being chased, so he didn't sound as freaked out as Lou. Henry told him to meet them at Lou's house. 10 minutes later, all four were in Lou's backyard, gathering their thoughts and discussing what just happened. They had a good laugh about it now that it was over, eating some of the candy they got. Kay went home, while Henry, Jay, and Lou hung out in the living room for a while. Lights off, TV on, playing an Xbox One party game. Jay looked out the window, then ducked and whispered for them to shush and turn off the TV. When they asked why, he said there was a clown out there. Henry didn't believe him, so he looked out the window. Jay screamed, "Don't!" but it was too late. The clown standing outside of Lou's house looked directly at Henry through the glass. Henry shut the curtains and told Lou that Jay wasn't lying. Lou's parents weren't home, so getting his dad wasn't an option. They shut off the TV and went upstairs to Lou's bedroom. They looked out the window. The clown wasn't there anymore. They never saw either of the clowns again. But the next morning, Lou texted the three of them, saying he found a rubber clown nose on his backyard patio table. He said it was obviously placed there with the intent to scare them, and mission accomplished. Luckily, that clown epidemic didn't last more than a month later. After that, it just became an old story.
The figure in the ghoul house. Henry's older brother was having a Halloween party. His brother, a college sophomore, was taking advantage of their parents being gone for the weekend. Henry, however, was only in the 8th grade. His brother made it abundantly clear he didn't want Henry in the house during the party. Fortunately, Henry had already made plans to go trick-or-treating with two of his friends, Jay and Keenan. They all agreed it would probably be their last year, so they wanted to make it a good time. They started midday, right after school. This was the prime time. Most kids were out, most people answered their doors, and candy was still abundant. They each filled 2 bags by dark, making stops at their houses to drop them off, but they weren't done. They needed another bag. After eating dinner and resting at Jay's place for a while, they went back out with empty bags and flashlights. They knew why they'd need them soon enough. It was probably around 9 o'clock now. Getting candy was slower. Most buckets were empty, and not everyone was answering their doors. An hour flew by, though they didn't get much candy. By 10:30 or 11, they stopped, realizing it was obnoxious to knock on doors so late. Everyone else was home. It was a Tuesday school night. They had already agreed to skip school the next day. They were all in the same homeroom and knew nothing important was happening. To them, the night was still young. So they ran to what locals called the Ghoul House. It was notorious for its history. A couple divorced after their child somehow died there, and a few weeks after the wife moved out, the husband shot himself at the kitchen table. The house had been fenced off ever since. Why it hadn't been sold or torn down was beyond Henry. When they got there, they realized how scary the house was in the dark. It stood taller than the neighboring houses, surrounded by a black fence and overgrown bushes. The front gate was pretty easy to hop. The deviance of what they were doing made it thrilling. They walked around back to avoid neighbors. The back windows were boarded up from the inside, and the back door had a table wedged up against it. Someone clearly tried hard to keep people out. Through teamwork, they were able to quietly lift the table off the door and onto the grass. The door was missing a doorknob and pushed in relatively easily. They were inside, and it felt weird, uncomfortable, and exhilarating all at once. All three had their flashlights, creating a decent amount of light in the otherwise pitch-black building.
They were in the back living area, a kind of den. The wood floors were creaky as hell, and everything seemed untouched for years. It didn't look like anyone had broken in before. The room was clear of anything interesting, so they moved on to the kitchen. An archaic fridge sat in the corner. Keenan opened it, and immediately the room filled with a foul, rotten, plasticky odor. The fridge held some old, empty milk and orange juice cartons. That was about it. The whole kitchen smelled foul, so they got out of there quickly. Next was the living room, and this room was just creepy. Something about it made you think that anytime you turned around, someone would be standing in one of the corners. Keenan pointed his light up and said, "Look at that!" There was a giant hole in the ceiling, leading straight up to a room upstairs. As Jay and Henry shined their lights up there were a couple of thumps from right above them. They all shut their lights. Henry got that horrible, painful feeling in his heart area from what he just heard. They all whispered very lightly that those were definitely footsteps. Jay whispered they should go up there and see what it was. Keenan and Henry said absolutely no way and started tiptoeing to the back door. But Jay was persistent. He didn't follow them. Instead, he went upstairs, not even making an effort to be quiet. Keenan and Henry felt obligated to wait for him in the living room, so they stayed put. They heard his footsteps crossing the upstairs of the house until he stopped right above them. Henry's eyes had adjusted to the dark, so even without their flashlights, he was able to clearly see the figure of his friend, standing above them, looking down through the hole. Henry tried whispering up there loud enough for Jay to hear, but he couldn't. Henry didn't want to get any louder, but suddenly they heard footsteps coming from the main staircase in the living room. They both turned on their flashlights and shined them up to the top of the staircase, seeing Keenan walking down the stairs. The realization set in immediately. Neither of them had the courage to shine their lights up at that hole in the ceiling to see who was actually standing there. Henry just screamed, "Run!" They all booked it to the back door, out of the house, and to Jay's house. Jay, who had been upstairs, said he smelled something foul up there, like a rotting carcass, and that he also heard breathing coming from one of the rooms. To this day, they have no idea who was in that house, but it seemed unlikely that it was just another curious wanderer, given how heavily boarded up the house was. To say the least, they don't go there anymore.